Our speaker tonight is one of the most influential people in the national media. Michael Ramirez's work is syndicated all across the country. He's the senior editor and cartoonist at Investors Business Daily, and he opines on everything from President Obama, Benghazi, Obamacare, Hillary Clinton, Vladimir Putin, immigration, global warming, Nancy Pelosi, unions, gun control, the IRS, guns, and the Iran nuclear deal. A collection of this work can all be viewed and will make you laugh in his new book. It's called Give Me Liberty or Give Me Obamacare. And he'll be available to sign it in the lobby after this event. Ladies and gentlemen, the Pulitzer Prize winning Michael Ramirez.
How's everybody doing tonight? You know, it never rains in California, right? I was giving a speech in Chicago, and shortly afterwards, people lined up and they came up to sign stuff, and there was this very strange-looking man, and he was very dynamic and energetic, and I could see him sort of standing in line and kind of moving around, and I watched this gentleman as he worked his way up through the line. And then when he got to me, before I could say a word, he said, "Worst speech ever." And then he just kind of took off. And I'm a political cartoonist. I'm used to people saying mean things to me, so it wasn't that bad of a deal. But I watched this guy as he sort of made his way across the ballroom and then across the back and then get back in line. And I just thought, wow, must have been a really bad speech. And so I'm watching this guy as he's kind of bobbing around and working his way back up. And again, he made it back up to the front of the line, and before I could say a word, he said, "That speech sucked," and he just took off. Now my feelings were getting a little hurt. And I watched it in amazement as this guy, again, made his way down to the back of the ballroom and then across the back and into line again. And so I just, this time I was gonna grab him and find out, what exactly it was about the speech that he didn't like. So this guy sort of made his way up, and I went to grab him, but before I could, he kind of shifted out of the way, and he said, "Worst speech in history," and ran off. And so I turned to the next guy and I said, "Who is that guy? Do you have any idea who that gentleman is?" And he said, "Don't worry, that's just Crazy Larry. He's just kind of a kook that hangs out here, and he's just a little nutty, and he means nothing. He just repeats what everybody else says." A story with a twist, an element of humor to capture your attention, and then the fatal blow. In essence, that's editorial cartooning. Before I go into a summary of my book, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what I do. Now, editorial cartoons are about concept. The illustration is merely a vehicle to convey a point of view. We like to say that editorial cartoons are kind of a hybrid. We're a cross between Edward R. Murrow, Ted Koppel, and the son of Sam. Basically, I get paid to be obnoxious. Now, it's the only other profession besides dentistry where you get paid to be obnoxious. Politicians will have you believe that they're paid to be obnoxious. They're not paid to be, they're just obnoxious. But 95% of what I do is concept or pushing a particular point of view. It's really a profession about ideas. We're the pit bulls of journalism, and we're trained to attack at the slightest provocation. We're the prosecution pushing for a rapid conviction and an immediate execution. We're the defense, punching holes in the arguments raised against our cause. We are judge, we are jury. Hopefully I'm nothing like the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, so my judgments actually make sense. But, I've got a bunch of colleagues here from IBD, and they can tell you that the editorial page people are pretty boring, or at least maybe I'm pretty boring. All we do is sit around and read. Our job is about reading and researching, to to digest the complex issues and to bring some semblance of order to them, to refine those thoughts, to project an idea. So, I start my day around 5 or 5:30 in the morning, and I read everything I can get my hands on. I take 3 newspapers a day. I read the best publication in the world, Investor's Business Daily. And a lot of people tell you that the truth lies somewhere between the editorial pages of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. The truth lies in the pages of Investor's Business Daily. And we have the best editorial page. And I'll tell you what, as a tool for investment, you just cannot beat IBD. So when you get a chance, look at investors.com/cartoons and then go to the other stuff. I'm a political analyst. I'm a political wonk. I read everything, get my hands on. I watch the news shows to get a sense of what's on the tip of the American psyche, what you guys are being spoon-fed as news every day. The one bad thing about being a political cartoonist is you only have one window of an opportunity to convey a point of view. So people have to have a general idea of what you're talking about. We spend our time gathering information. We process the information to draw a conclusion, to draw a cartoon, and hopefully to draw blood. Now, I think the modern trend in editorial cartooning has been to make simple jokes about current affairs. I think humor without a substantive statement kind of diminishes the importance of an editorial cartoon. So I'm in a different school where I think an editorial cartoon is not just a funny picture. A good editorial cartoon, I think, is a fine instrument of journalism. At times it's sharp and refined. It's message cutting, quickly to the point, at times blunt, with its dark imagery, seizing the reader's attention. But as with any editorial, the cartoon has a point, and that's the most important element of a political cartoon. It tells a story. It defines an issue. It challenges hypocrisy. It reveals the best and the worst of humanity. And of course, I'm talking about Congress. It calls the reader to arms against the complacent, the lethargic, the evildoers, the indolent body politic, the champions of the status quo, the assorted predators of society. A good editorial cartoon shouldn't only just be well-researched, it should be carefully contemplated. For instance, let me use the example of Johnny Cochran. He was most well-known for the O.J. Simpson trial. And when he died, the first image that came to my mind was Mr. Cochran at the gates of heaven with St. Peter saying, "If the halo don't fit, we don't admit." Now, that's a pretty straightforward cartoon. Johnny Cochran got a murderer off. But if you took a closer examination of what Mr. Cochran's career was, it really revealed this generous man who I think engaged in many charitable causes. And it seemed unfair to define him by one case. But I drew the cartoon anyways. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't draw the cartoon. Another circumstance would be the space shuttle Challenger, and where 7 American heroes died. And the experts said that accident was caused because NASA, might have been caused because NASA's efforts to curb spending and they're kind of cutting corners on and creating safety concerns. So I thought of this idea where I had little pieces of the shuttle just flying through the air and with a bubble that said, "Man, these NASA cutbacks are killing us." Now, it's a very powerful image, but I think the controversy surrounding the cartoon would overshadow the point I was trying to make. And the bottom line for us political cartoonists is we want to sell you on an idea. We don't want to just offend you. We want to make a point. And if you're debating all the extra fringe elements of a cartoon, then you miss the point, and we miss the opportunity to do our jobs. I think editorial cartoons should do more than offend, but the right to offend, I think, always has to be defended. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But while these rights are indeed endowed by Creator and guaranteed by our Constitution, it is government that upholds these liberties. It is men who constitute the government. So there are those who believe the Constitution is merely a starting point for negotiation. And so that's why we have political cartoonists. James Madison wrote, "I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments by those in power than by silent and sudden usurpations." And I think that is more true today than ever before. Journalism, editorial cartoons are a check to the erosion of our liberties and part of the first line of defense to the advance of the unrestrained power of government. One good editorial cartoon can have a significant impact on the political dialogue of the day. We want to reach the people. I think if it's done well, it can influence those who govern to govern responsibly and expose them when they do not. Einstein said, two things are infinite: the universe and human stupidity. And I'm not sure about the universe. Einstein was right. It's this axiom that makes political cartooning important. The people who ultimately govern can make mistakes. They're human after all. But history has demonstrated that power can turn leaders into monsters. So editorial cartoonists will gladly point out the shortcomings of the powerful in an effort to keep them human. The reason our founding fathers included the right to a free press in the First Amendment of our Constitution is that information is a necessary component to guide you in a political system based on self-governance and individual liberty. Information is power. I was thinking about this the other day. Imagine if you heard about this great little computer company called Apple back in December 12th in 1980, and you purchased like 100 shares at its initial public offering at $22 a share, if you can believe it. Those shares would be worth close to $500,000 now. Information is power. That's why newspapers are a good product for you, because it gives you an expanding universe. Thomas Jefferson once wrote, "Our liberty depends on the freedom of the press, and that cannot be limited without it being lost." The reason our founding fathers included the right to a free press in our Constitution was because they knew that the communication of ideas and information, the right to be informed and to inform, the dissemination of ideas and the expression of opinion are all necessary components in a political system based on self-governance. A free press is a check on government power. It's the daylight in the dark arena of politics. It provides the voter with information to decide their future, but the press has to do their job. And I think that's one of the criticisms I'm going to bring up tonight. It's most important now when dealing with this president and this administration and the failures of their policy. Unfortunately, the only people more incompetent than this administration seem to be the Washington Press Corps. A reporter's job is to be the purveyor of fact, to point out the injustices of the world, to shine the spotlight of exposure, to wound the perpetrators of those injustices with the truth. Editorial cartoonists, well, we just go back and shoot the wounded. Now, I don't think the mainstream media is serving the public by delivering slanted coverage. I think, honestly, I think they become the propaganda arm of a political party. I think there's widespread manipulation going on in the media. So with this book, I'm going to try to clarify sort of the mythology built around the Obama administration. And I find it interesting that people are overjoyed that, Donald Trump is so blunt and politically incorrect. It's something I've been doing for my entire career. So let me start off now and say, I wrote in the introduction of my book, and the National Review said it was one of the best factually based takedowns of the Obama administration written yet. I started out by saying the Peter Principle is when a person is elevated to their level of incompetence. The Obama Principle is when that person becomes president of the United States. Now, I'm an equal opportunity offender, but with this administration, editorial cartooning is more like stenography than a creative process. When people ask me, how do you come up with your ideas? I always say, well, Now, I have the best gag writer in the world working for me in the Oval Office every day. That's when he's not on vacation or playing golf. Now, his policies are the joke. His speeches are the setup, and their failure are the punchlines. Except nobody's laughing because it hurts too much to laugh. When Senator Obama was asked if he was prepared for the 3 a.m. phone call, he said, of course. Then 3 a.m. came, and President Obama was nowhere on site. On 9/11/2012, when Benghazi was under attack. Instead, you got his answering machine. It said, you reached the office of President Barack Hussein Obama. I'm not here right now. If you have an anti-Islam video I can use for political cover, press 1. If you want me to go to Las Vegas for a fundraiser right after the killing of 3 brave Americans and the first assassination of a U.S. ambassador in 33 years, please press 2. For golf after beheadings, please press 3. In 2009, the newly inaugurated President Obama claimed to be a centrist and offered a vision of unity and reasonable moderation. America was ready for change. With Obama came the promise of transparency and a return to the rule of law. He promised a sound fiscal policy. He promised to bring America back together, but he didn't. He promised Americans, if you like your health plan, you can keep it, but they couldn't. The president had a big flaw. He had a pathological addiction to prevarication. This flaw, however, turned out to be relatively minor compared to the size of his ego. Actually, everything is relatively small compared to the size of his ego. And that oversized ego and those pathological lies quickly became the abundance of cartoon ideas. He was a president with a majority in the House and a supermajority in the Senate. This is something you shouldn't forget. He had the power to implement his vision. That was the problem. He was never a centrist. His centrism was a fable conjured up by his campaign and repeated ad nauseum by complicit media. That was the problem. If he had paid attention, for those of us who did pay attention, we knew there was never anything moderate about Barack Obama. He was a far-left politician with a far-left agenda. His real vision for America was its radical transformation. The first step, like limbo, the first circle of Dante's hell, abandon all hope, all ye who enter here. There was no hope. It was just about change. You see, President Obama believes government is not the problem. He believes government is the solution. He believes that our enemies are not bad. He believes they're simply misunderstood. He believes that corporations create inequality, not jobs. He sees America as the land of plenty, but in his mind, that's a bad thing. In Obama's world, America is a land of excess, of immoderate indulgences, of intemperance and gluttony, with a lack of restraint and a rapacious appetite for everything. In Obama's world, American capitalism is responsible for the subjugation of the worker. American consumption is responsible for creating geological and ecological destruction and global warming. American greed is responsible for creating the poor. American ingenuity is responsible for the exploitation of the masses. American exceptionalism is the reason for global hostility against America. See, President Obama believes, to borrow a phrase from Walt Kelly, that we have met the enemy, and he is us. That's why the media loves him. They agree with him. Albert Einstein once said that intellectuals solve problems. Geniuses prevent them. Obama creates them. Remember Obama's chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, who said, you never want a serious crisis to go to waste. Taking those words to heart, his administration spent 2 terms creating crisis after crisis. Let's examine his record. Obama's foreign policy is a disaster. He's possibly the worst negotiator we've ever had. His policy of appeasement and leading from behind has diminished our global reputation, alienated our allies, and emboldened our enemies. Islamic extremism and the prospect of terrorism in our post-9/11 world continues to expand. Radical Islamic groups control more territory than ever before, and now Iran controls Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iraq. Worse, Iran has grown ever closer to developing nuclear weapons and starting a nuclear arms race in a region awash in oil money but lacking in reverence for human life. You know, I have to explain to people mutually assured destruction, the policy that kept us safe in the Cold War. It's not a deterrent for those who want to die for their cause. China has begun to flex its muscles and threatens its neighbors. Russia is invading its neighbors. Under President Obama, the world has become a more dangerous place, especially for Americans. The architecture of policy, the setting of artificial timetables, the micromanagement and conclusion of the wars in both, the premature conclusion of the wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan, were designed by the Obama administration for political advantage, not strategic victory. Relinquishing those countries to terrorists, releasing terrorists to closed Gitmo while putting U.S. troops in harm's way, and giving Cuba to the communists was, in the president's mind, a small price to pay in order to fulfill his political promises. But Obama could proclaim mission accomplished, and he did it. And he did it over and over again. You see, because in President Obama's mind, all this made perfect sense. Because to President Obama, the threat is not external, it's internal. America is the threat. America is the enemy. And Obama is at war with America. American exceptionalism is the disease. And Obamacare was just the first step towards a cure. And Saul Alinsky's third rule of ethics of means and ends and rules for radicals is that in war, the end justifies almost any means. And Obama meant to put an end to American exceptionalism. When you look at the Obama green economy in 2012, it was called the worst economic recovery in American history. Under Obamonomics, the national debt increased $7.4 trillion in just 6 years. It's 18.54 or something now. If we pass the president's budgets, we'd be closer to $20 trillion now. And now that we've, the spending caps have been removed, we're going to get there pretty soon and pretty quickly. U.S. household median income dropped 12% in the 6 years between 2007 and 2013. By 2013, incomes had dropped twice as much during the recovery as they did during the recession. Remember, the recession started just 5 months after the recovery started just 5 months after he took office. More than 48 million Americans are living in poverty, including 1 in 5 young adults. 65% of children living in households receive one or more forms of federal aid. 46.4 million Americans receiving food stamps. He's increased all those poverty levels by almost 15 million. The labor participation rate is the lowest rate since 1976, and the U6 unemployment rate is nearly 12%. During the Obama administration, we've witnessed the first ever credit downgrade in U.S. history in 2011. During the Obama administration, we witnessed the second ever credit downgrade in U.S. history in 2012. We've seen a dramatic increase in income inequality. Black and minority families have been hit the hardest. The wealth of white households was 13 times the median wealth of blacks in 2013, which is 7 times greater than in 2010. Now, the root cause of all of this is the substantial growth in government regulations, subsidies, and programs under this administration. And now he wants to give everyone free college. Never mind that we have $128 trillion in unfunded liabilities and entitlements right now. You know, Alexis de Tocqueville once said, "The American Republic will endure until the day Congress discovers that it can bribe the public with its own money." I think de Tocqueville had this president pegged. And while the list of economic failures to date is long, the list of the president's excuses are even longer. The president's blamed George W. Bush, Congress, when it was controlled by the Democrats, the GOP Congress, when the GOP controlled neither the House or the Senate, the GOP Congress, when it controlled the House, the European debt crisis, the Japanese tsunami, ATMs, the rich, Wall Street, Main Street, millionaires, those who make over $250,000 a year, those who make under $250,000 a year, the Iraq War, the war in Afghanistan, the Arab Spring, tax breaks, global warming, globalization, automation, the euro, bad luck, super PACs, the Supreme Court. It just goes on and on. George W. Bush about 10 times. And this is a president who refuses to take responsibility for anything. He's even blamed the U.S. Constitution. But ignoring the law has never seemed to be a problem for this administration. As you've seen, he wants to let felons out on the street now. He wants to go ahead and pass amnesty. The long list of scandals proves that he doesn't believe in the Constitution at all. Fast and Furious, the possible Holder perjuries, the GM bailout, Obamacare, Solyndra, national intelligence leaks, Benghazi, using the IRS to target political enemies, the VA, the DOJ investigation of Fox reporter James Rosen, monitoring AP phone calls, the NSA data collection expansion, executing the DREAM Act, illegal executive appointments during congressional recesses, Gruber, and executive amnesty. Yet these were just the ones the president discovered while he was reading the newspaper. You know, for Editorial Cartoonist, it was like Christmas all year long. The president's abuse of executive authority has taken him to new heights of lawless behavior. You know, as a supposed constitutional law professor, I wonder why he never heard of Montesquieu or the separation of powers. Any one of these scandals, I think, would have crippled the Republican administration and sent scores of investigative teams in pursuit of a Pulitzer Prize, and maybe, just maybe, the truth. But the press continues to ignore them largely because they agree with this administration's political agenda. Well, it's a national disgrace. You see, they have an obligation to give you the truth. Not a filtered version of the truth, not a politically correct version of the truth, but simply the truth. And, you know, we're all human beings, and a good majority of journalists are as well. So they'll undoubtedly have their own interpretation of events, but that's what makes it so important to cover an issue in its entirety. Differing perceptions can easily color an issue. Let me give you an example. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson went out on a camping trip, and as they laid down to sleep, Holmes turned to Watson and he said, "Watson, look up into the sky and tell me what you see." And Watson thought about it for a minute, and he said, "Well, you know, I see millions and millions of stars." And Holmes said, "Well, what does that tell you?" And Watson replied, "Well, you know, astronomically, it tells me that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Theologically, it's so beautiful. There must be a God. And God is great, and we are small and insignificant. Meteorologically, well, it's a beautiful, clear evening sky. It's probably going to be a beautiful day tomorrow." And then Watson turned to Holmes and he said, "What does it tell you?" And Holmes looked up and he said, "Somebody stole our tent." You know, we have a participatory democratic republic, the best system of government in the world. Truly a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But only if the people participate. You know, it's amazing when you look back in history at a small group of colonies united to fight taxation without representation. It's clearly evident now that we face the same challenge. This is a nation founded on the principles of limited government, individual liberty, self-responsibility, and a strong national defense. In 2008, Barack Obama promised hope and change, but all that he delivered was doubt and division. He wanted change, all right, a radical transformation of our country, and he hoped nobody would notice. It is time to take our country back. Information is power. James Madison once wrote, "Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives." It's the duty of good editorial cartooning to inform. It is the job of the good citizen to be informed. So I hope you find my new book, at the very least entertaining, but more so serving as a catalyst for thought. You know, I kind of say that it's an illustrated indictment of the Obama administration, a good self-help book for liberals still in denial. I hope it will inspire you as a call to action, a call to serve, and a call to get involved in the process of self-governance, because who controls your destiny is up to you. America is the greatest country in the world, and it's because of its extraordinary citizens. So everybody dig in. This is going to be a huge election coming up. Let me tell you a few things that I'm concerned about. Out of the appellate courts, 9 of the 13 are run by progressive majorities, and they are trying to legislate from the bench. If you lose the 5-4 Supreme Court advantage, you are going to lose this country for a generation. You know, Iran is a big problem as well on spending. This debt that we've accrued, which is really a legacy for not only our children but our grandchildren, is completely irresponsible. It comes out to about $55,000 for every man, woman, and child. It is time to do something about it. So dig in, talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, get engaged. It's time to take the country back. I'm going to try to influence you by showing you some cartoons.
Michael has agreed to take a couple of questions, and then we're going to get into our front lobby and start a book signing. Our first question is going to come from Wayne here. Wayne, why don't you step out here?
Okay. The question is, when you see on TV and they do the questions of the people on the street and they know nothing about this country, what is the media's responsibility? What would you do?
You know, that's a broader question, actually. I think the media is irresponsible because they are not giving people an objective view of what's going on in the world. It's not their responsibility to educate people, though, and that to me are things that we need to really consider. You know, I was at one of those evil Coke conferences, and I was talking to Charles and David, and I was telling them, look, it's great that you guys are investing in political campaigns, but you need to invest in the infrastructure of intelligence. And by that I mean what I call the 3 pillars of influence. One, you need to reform education, because what they're doing is they're using education for propaganda and then reinforcing those ideas in higher academia. Then they graduate from school and they're immersed in popular culture, which is dominated by progressives. My friend Mark Joseph here is producing the new Reagan movie. You know, we can't get conservatives to step up and fund these projects, but they need to do it. It's amazing how much influence popular culture has. I mean, Will and Grace and Friends probably had a huge role on this new revolution on having same-gender weddings. The third pillar is the media. You know, I'm lucky to have the best boss in the world, Bill O'Neill and his son Scott, and they are actually funding journalism schools to plant seeds of people that actually have ideas of how the economy works to be journalists. But conservatives need to step up in all 3 of these areas. You know, public education, number one's very easy. Nobody can look at our education system and say it's doing a good job. You know, we do a good job up until the 6th grade, but after the 6th grade, we fall to the bottom of the industrialized nations in all categories: readings, writing, science, and math, which is a shame. Nobody can say that our public education system is working. We need to invest in reforming that and putting it on a local level and ensuring that we're protecting education and not teachers' jobs or the bureaucracies that surround them. Second, conservatives need to step up. You know, the most popular movies are some of the movies Mark has worked with, Narnia, The Passion of Christ. They're huge blockbusters. You know, these family movies sell the most. I don't know why conservatives aren't investing more in popular culture in these shows. You know, the Kardashian thing, I just don't even understand. I have to say, I was with my mom and my family in Italy, and we're in Florence, and we're walking around, and we just picked the worst week to be there. It happened to be Fashion Week. And right through all these crowds, this paparazzi started cruising through the crowd, and you saw these cameras and microphones, and I'm going, what is that? And I look over, and I think it's Snooki, or whatever her name is, from Jersey Shore, and she's walking down the cobbled streets of Florence, pulling her wheeled luggage. I don't know anybody who does that. I mean, you pull it from the taxi cab into your hotel, but not down the street. And these people are following them, and I turned to my brother and I just said, you know, that's the problem. The world is looking at this, and they're thinking, that is America. I mean, who watches these shows? And I turn, and his wife's gone, and I look, and she's running down the street with a pad to get her autograph. Yeah, I don't get it. But they're making $109 million a season for their new contract. It's crazy. We need to reform popular culture. And look, when a newspaper or something comes up for sale by our TV station, look, we got lots of billionaires. Buy it.
Exactly. Why didn't Mitt Romney buy the Orange County Register?
Next
Absolutely.
question.
Absolutely. Yes.
Back of the room to your left.
Mr. Ramirez, my question is more historic, and that is, how would you say that political cartooning or your trade has changed in America, perhaps, or in Europe in the last several hundred years?
Well, you know, I'm only 104, so I missed the first 10 of those years. But you know what? I'll be honest with you. I never intended to be a political cartoonist. I was telling these gentlemen here from Arizona that I wanted to be a cardiovascular surgeon. And I think of all the lives I saved by becoming a journalist instead. So I don't know a whole lot of history of cartooning beyond, you know, the basic components, Ben Franklin, a little bit of Daumier and stuff. But I can tell you with the recent transition in journalism, in political cartooning, which I do not like, and it's the same thing that the entire apparatus of media is going through the same evolution, which is infotainment. You know, political cartooning, I fell in love with it because as a young child, every morning I would wake up and read the newspaper with my dad. He would read the LA Times, I would read the Orange County Register, and we would swap halfway through. And every once in a while I'd see these cartoons by, you know, Paul Conrad, who became a friend of mine later in life, Jeff McNelly, who was a dear friend of mine later in life. And I just loved what they did. But I never thought in a million years I would do that for a living. Back then, it was about journalism. And, you know, Paul used these iconic, hard-hitting, just dark, gloomy images to make a really strong point. I did not agree with a word he said, but he had a powerful way of saying it. And Jeff was just the most amazing illustrator and had the best sense of humor. And what he brought to the table were these powerful images coupled with humor, which made it a very potent weapon that would reach a much larger audience with his message. But it still had a substantive point. These days, it's really been turned into, you know, the Tonight Show monologue. And I'm opposed to that. I think there's a reason why there's a category of journalism for editorial cartooning, because I think it's there to make substantive statements about important issues and to inform the people and to be the catalyst for thought. So, you know, I'm hoping this is just a minor trend and that, you know, my fellow colleagues will come to their senses and start taking the job more seriously because, you know, I love what I do. I get the luxury of saying what everybody else thinks. But I'm trying to get you guys into action. You know, I've got so many friends that are politicians, and you'd be surprised how little it takes for them to assess the situation and to get activated to remedy it, because they get so little contact at their offices. And one thing we should all never forget, and despite these the political celebrity that surrounds these people, as they work for you. They are public servants. They're there to do your bidding. You have a right to demand their services, and you shouldn't treat them as anything special. That's the way this country was founded. We're a nation, we're a union of people, and these people are there because we can't all go to Congress and vote. They're your elected representatives. Don't ever let them forget that.
Next question.
Yeah, Mr. Ramirez,
Yes.
I'm interested in the way that you come up with the caricatures of the political creatures that you draw. Do you rely more upon photographs and images that you see on television, or if you've actually seen them in the flesh, like people like Anthony Weiner and Nancy Pelosi, where you come up with of the things? I mean, other cartoonists like Mike Sheldon and Steve Kelly, they have a lot more line economy, but you have a lot more detail in your drawings. And I was just always wondering if it was that you saw them in the flesh. I mean, the caricatures that you come up with.
Well, you know, I to be honest with you, I I haven't met all 435 members of Congress, but I do have Google. And I have these cataracts, which make me, no, I'm just kidding. You know, it's funny because I've always had this ability to look at something and be able to recreate it. I just thought that was just something common. In fact, it's so bizarre to me that people can't do that you can't look at something and draw it. And, you know, I drew until I was in the 6th grade. And then I drew this drawing of, I made a drawing of The Thinker, you know, the statue of Rodin. And apparently it was so good that they thought there's no way I could have possibly drawn it. And so instead of winning the art contest, I got 2nd place. And, you know, that just turned me off from drawing. I just gave it up then. Actually, it was more involved than that. I got the 2nd place ribbon, and then I went to the back of the room. I tossed it in the trash can and gave up drawing. And then my dad, of course, made me go all the way back to the trash can, field it out, and apologize for doing that, which he was right to do. But I just gave up drawing then and there. And it wasn't until I got into college that I started doing it again. And, you know, as I was telling these gentlemen here, all my brothers and sisters are doctors. I'm the black sheep of the family. In fact, the only way I can show up at family reunions is I tell them, well, you know, I'm a journalist that deals with Congress, so I'm almost like a proctologist. So, and so they let me in. But I wanted to be a cardiovascular surgeon. And my brother and sister who preceded me in college said in order to get into medical school, they're looking for more well-rounded people. So you should take you should try, you know, drawing or get an art degree or something that was so dissimilar from biological science. I was a triple major, biological sciences, fine arts, and studio painting. And so one day but I wrote. I was my high school newspaper because we had a closed campus, and the only way you could get off campus was 2 ways. One was an office pass. The other one was the editor of the newspaper could write themselves a press pass whenever they wanted. And so I became the editor of the newspaper. And boy, I'll tell you, anytime the waves got over 3 foot, I had to be on the beach to report that. And so I had this ulterior motive also. If you wrote to music publishing clubs, to producers and stuff, they'd send you albums to review, and you'd get tickets to concerts, and 5th row, right smack in the center. You get you get to keep them, and you get to go to Hollywood premieres. And so I did it for that reason. When I was in college, I continued to write. I wrote editorials, and I'm a horrible writer, but I wrote anyways, and I did editorials. Never heard of Pete. And one day I was walking into the office to file a story, and my editor said, I didn't know you could draw. I was holding a painting that I was working on. And she said, why don't you do a political cartoon on the student election that's going on? And so I went and interviewed all the candidates, and none of them had a clue why they wanted to run. It was just sort of a popularity contest. One of them was named Donald Trump. No. Anyways, and so none of these people had any idea why they wanted to be, you know, the president of the student council. And so I just ripped them all. And this one cartoon came out, and we had 3 days of protests over this one drawing. And I thought, man, I'd been writing all these really hard-hitting editorials, and nobody cared. You draw one picture, everybody hates you. Bingo. And so I did that for about maybe a month. And the local newspaper, the Newport Ensign, actually just called me up and offered me a job. And I had this stretch between organic chemistry and Bio 101 where I would go surfing at the beach, and it was along the way. So I just whip out a cartoon. It took me about half an hour. I got $50. It was good pay back then. And then one day there was an incident in my junior year where this guy got pulled over by the Newport Beach Police Department. They didn't allow him a phone call. They kind of roughed him up. They arrested him for drunk driving. Turned out he was this city council member who didn't drink. And so I drew this guy hogtied on the hood of a police car with his shoe wedged in his mouth. And the arresting officer was explaining to the sergeant, well, I was merely reinforcing his constitutional right to remain silent. And the police chief was so mad that he came down to the office and he yelled at the editor, he yelled at the publisher, and he tried to find out where I lived. And suddenly it dawned on me, like, what a profound impact these drawings have. And I think that's the minute that I fell in love with it. In fact, Actually had a speech in Chicago, and somebody asked me, do you get death threats, and what was the first death threat you ever got? And I said, of course, you get death threats all the time. It's part of the job. People are emotionally invested in their politics. But the first death threat I got was when I graduated from college, UCI. I told my parents I was going to take a year off from medical school to become a political cartoonist, and they threatened to kill me. So, thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it.